I'm explaining the sort of structural arrangement of the course at the moment. So for those of you that only have the module, you're going to be in the first 2-hour session, and then you'll leave and continue with your homework or whatever, and we'll see each other next week. For those of you that have the module and the major, like one combined 4-hour session, we'll have a little break in the middle, and then we'll continue with the major component from there on. So the idea with combining these two or putting them back to back is that we found a lot of the times that the modules and the majors were sort of disconnected, and students just ended up with more projects and more work, and as a sort of a byproduct of that, more mediocre work, because you've got more stuff to do, so you don't tend to spend that much time on the quality of the work. And I don't know if you've kept up with like developments in technology and so forth, but if we don't produce high quality or high standard of creative output, there's going to be a computer that can do it better than us. So we need to make sure that we raise ourselves to the level that we can compete and can use AI tools and things to supplement our creative output, rather than, falling in the wayside and not actually producing work of an acceptable quality. Okay, so the point is that we spend more time honing in on our skills and having a higher output of quality work. So that's why the two were combined. Also in the future, we're not going to open up our courses to external subjects as much as we've done now. We're rather changing the credit structure so that it's easier to take subjects and majors across field. And that's the aim. You'll see more of that next year when you're in third year, hopefully, or even for those of you that are part-time second year, you'll start noticing that it would become easier for you to manage your workload and sort of align your subjects better. Hopefully that'll seem like less work or more constructive work. Then there's this one funny little subject that we created that's been present in other schools like visual communication and creative technology, where they have a theory subject paired with their major, which is called production theory. Now, almost everything that we do in animation is what's experiential. It means that we mimic a studio environment or workflow or industry related process. So we don't necessarily need something like production theory to supplement our major. What we'd rather do is supplement the major course with something that we've dubbed media aesthetics. Now, media aesthetics existed in the past as a supplementary or foundational subject for film arts students to pick up more sort of design orientated skills. So the media aesthetics subject that you'll hear more about, I think you have it on Thursdays, all of you together, all of the animation arts cohort. That's to enhance your aesthetic output. So in other words, make things prettier. So we do design principles, and we do color theory and things like that in that subject. So if you feel like sometimes content was brushed over or skipped over, it might be because there's another subject that's sort of supplementing that aspect of it. So a lot of what it means in the end of the day is that a lot of the content that we're going to be covering is very specific to 3D and very technically orientated. Okay, the module may be a little less technically orientated. The major obviously more so. Let me think if there's something else that I also need to mention. It might come back to me. There's a lot of content that we need to cover over the course of the year. I'm going to be primarily, I think, involved in the back end. So I'm doing this term, the first term of 3D 200. So it's mainly character development and character design, as you'll see once we go through the briefs. But Tienes is actually doing the Wednesday and the Thursday classes. You might know Tienes from last year, or if anyone of you come from the certificate, then you might have encountered him before. But he'll take the classes later in the week, and some of the classes later in the year as well. I don't know if you've met all the lecturers, but you'll sort of meet them as you go along. There's There's Tiernis, there's Chris, there's Sean, who's your subject manager, and then myself, who's head of the animation arts department. So a lot of the stuff that I'll be doing would be in the back end, making sure that all the curriculum stuff is in place, and then we'll have different facilitators throughout the year. Each one of those facilitators playing to their strengths. So yeah, you'll see how it changes. So you won't have me for the entire year. Lucky you don't have to listen to this voice all the time. But yeah, I'll do my best to make sure that if there's any need for anyone to transition or catch up classes or attend another class, that all of that is fairly seamless. Okay. I think that's okay. Cool. Questions? Yeah. Oh, there's 2, 3. Let's go with Vicky first.
I just want to ask. First, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just want to ask. I'm busy just doing the modules for this year.
Okay.
Oh, I had a question, but I don't know how to ask it.
So you stay on for the first 2 hours, and then when we take
Okay.
a break to continue with the major work, you can just drop off.
Okay. And then also, I know that last year with the majors and modules, like if you did the major, you had to do like a specific theme or something. And I'm only doing the modules. I don't know if it's going to still work the same as last year.
It will still work the same. Even before the modules and the major were accredited as one unit, even though we treated them as 2 separate things. Okay. I think it'll just mean that your module will allow you to have a little bit more creative play. You can sort of create something that isn't necessarily ready for 3D production. The aim of the module is more conceptual. Okay. And coming up with a design for a character that could be used as a reference for an animated character, but it can have many outputs. I'll go through that in the briefing session as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cool. Gareth.
Hi, Stefan.
Hi.
So is the major going to happen in the same call after this 2 hours?
Yes. Yeah, we can just stick around. There is a Discord server as well, so I feel like as soon as we start doing more sort of interactive group-based work or breakout sessions and things like that, the Discord server will probably be a better fit for that. But I'll let you know in advance if we're switching over. Join the Discord server in the meantime so that you're on there, and then yeah, and then we'll start every class like this though. We'll start every class in Google. It's on the calendar, so and then we'll disperse from here if we need to. Okay, cool. Right. Well, let's look at the brief then. I'm gonna, just for ease of navigation, the Discord link will be in the brief itself as well. So I'm going to just switch off my face. You can switch off your cameras as well, because I probably won't be seeing you since I'm sharing my screen. Thank you for saying hi. It says no. Computer says no, I can't share my screen. We'll try that again. The briefing session. Okay, so the module is called 3D Character Design. It's part of Animation Arts, and the code for it is 3D 201. So the majors are normally 3D 200, term 1, term 2, term 3, and the modules would be 201, 202, 203, and that's sort of just the structure that we use. For ease of access, I've just combined the sessions into one Google Meet session, so you can just join that every week, and like I said, half of you can drop off, or you can stay on if you're interested in what the majors are up to. You just won't get you won't be able to submit assignments or get evaluated or anything like that, of course. And you'll probably get kicked if you're being annoying, but otherwise it should be fine. Another sort of core concept that we're working with within Animation Arts is the idea of the flipped classroom. So what we're going to try and do is provide you with enough training materials that you can go home and do your homework by going through the tutorials and the training and the relevant videos on your own time. And then when you come back to class, we can actually continue with the work in class and basically fulfill the brief that way. so that you don't have to, because sometimes you go home and you work and then you get stuck, you get frustrated and you quit and you come to class the next week because frustrated and demotivated because you couldn't manage to do something. And this way we sort of alleviate that there's a support structure there the whole time in class. So this week might look a little bit different. We are going to kind of like have to look at, well, besides the brief, some of the components and maybe some tutorials to start off with. But from next week on, most of the class time is going to be used for, or the majority of the class time will be used for working in class and getting the tasks done. Okay, so we'll start with the overview, course content. We'll look at 3D authoring toolset today. Then later we'll look at character anatomy, so the sort of full body structure and how bodies change when we, when we add proportionate differences into the skeleton and to the muscle matter and the fat and so on. Then we focus more on facial anatomy, like where is everything. Just a side note, everything here is based on humanoid characters, so they sort of appear like humans, but they don't have to absolutely be humans. Thinking like you could even model something like Zoidberg from Futurama or whatnot, just as long as they're kind of bipedal and adhere to human conventions. You can have more ears, you can have longer ears or bigger eyes and that sort of stuff, as long as they have those features. Okay, then we look at sculpting facial detail, then more on character detail and presentation techniques. So in the end, what you'll do is you'll sculpt quite a high detailed untopologized mesh that you'll then present as a maquette for your final submission. Okay, so we look at lighting and presentation techniques and camera and so on. Then there's the academic rules, of course, and the termly overview that we'll go into now. And yeah, that's me. I just realized I didn't actually add Tianus to the module, but he's definitely involved in the major. I'll just rectify that. Okay. There's a lot of ways to approach this. We'll look at that in a minute. Okay, so the overview page is a little bit more exciting. That is not the overview.
Sorry, I have a quick question. It's probably a silly one, but what does untopologize mean? You said an untopologized mesh.
Unretopologized. So it's core crude topology. It doesn't mean that it necessarily follows the best modeling practices. It's literally it's more of a exploratory creative exercise than a technical one. But
all right, thank you.
I'll give you a good example of it in a minute.
All righty, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so there's our brief. We create these HTML briefs because we like the way they look and act. And then if you go to virtual window /briefs, you should see all of your briefs kind of pop up there. Okay, so for now, it's character design. You can email me at virtual window or at open window. It's minor differences really, because virtual window means that it's only student emails. So I'll definitely go and check that like once a week to make sure that all the students are okay and so on. Everything student issues are dealt with. But if there's something more administrative and not subject specific, like, I don't know, something seriously like some personal issues or something that you want to, I'm trying to think of scenarios, but like, let's say your computer completely combusted, set fire to itself or something like that, and you need a break to go and get another workstation, or you need to organize to come and work on campus or something like that. It's not necessarily subject related, and it's something that I could help you with, and you can just email me on the open window. So open window is more for admin related, virtual window is more for student specific and course related stuff. But either way, I'll get the mail. Okay, so we have that's not true. So that's a lie. Okay, let me just fix that. So right in the beginning, it's a slight error here. So that deliverable is week 3, not week 2. It'll be updated in the next time I upload it. Okay, so exploratory sculpts are due in week 3. Then you'll polish bust, which is typically a head and shoulder of a character, like this example here. It needs to be done in week 5, and then your full character turnaround render in week 8. Okay, so students will be introduced to the process of 3D authoring by sculpting from original designs, presenting them as virtual objects. Through the use of various tools and exploratory techniques, students will follow the examples demonstrated in this module to finalize and present their designs. The purpose of the exercise is to produce sculpted maquettes of a character that could potentially be referenced for animation, production, or manufacturing purposes.
Sorry, I have another question. Would you say it's easier to sculpt with a drawing tablet or with the mouse?
Drawing tablets are certainly useful. I use an iPad if I sculpt. I mirror my screen and then sculpt on the iPad screen, so that's very kind of like immediate in its feedback and response, so it feels like drawing. Whereas some tablets don't necessarily have screens, and then you have this sort of slightly disjointed, but you get used to it, and then you kind of like, you automatically calibrate yourself, your motor skills, fine motor skills to work on the side. Yeah, both are fine. And then there's mouse settings that you can apply, like the smoothing of the strokes and things like that allow you to sculpt a little bit better. But yeah, it's up to the individual, and also your resources. If you have the resources to acquire a tablet, and it's something that you're really interested in, if you like concept art, concept development, then I think, yeah, it's very useful. That in the background looks like a Cintiq, which is like a extra monitor, and they can get quite expensive.
Yeah.
But I think an entry-level tablet costs about 2,000 Rand.
Yeah, I already got one. I was just checking if it would be easier to use it in
Yeah.
sculpting, because I think it most likely would.
Yeah, most likely. Okay. So our focus is on character design, 3D sculpting, style and exaggeration, and then presentation techniques. So Steven Spielberg said, well, luckily with animation, fantasy is your friend. So meaning that there's no definitive wrong answer to a design. No one can tell you that it's completely absurd sometimes, or completely wrong, or it doesn't work. Perhaps there's ways of making it work better, and refining it, and solving things that look like mistakes. But essentially, you have the freedom to create pretty much anything your mind can conceive. Okay, so we're in week 1. We're doing the briefing session as we speak, and we'll move over to 3D authoring toolset in a bit. Week 2, like I said, we'll focus on character anatomy. There's 2 anatomy sessions, if you sort of care to notice. There's character anatomy, and then there's facial anatomy, and then there's facial detail and character detail. So we do it in a sort of a staggered approach. First, we'll do the blocking of our entire character, then we'll move in and focus on the detail aspect of the face, so that we can have a polished bust by a midterm. And then once we have the polished bust, we'll return back to the full proportionate character. It doesn't explicitly say that you're still working on sculpting here. It's more on presentation techniques, but trust me, you'll probably still be sculpting. There's one of these things, sort of unspoken elements to 3D as a medium, as a whole, or as a subject. And it takes a lot of time to get to a point where it's actually complete. So there's a lot of steps involved. There's a lot of elements and sort of structural decisions that need to be made. And there's a lot of refinement that goes into it, because it's digital, you can carry on sculpting into things, and you can really get carried away with detail sometimes. So you're most likely going to be sculpting a lot more than we say that you're sculpting, or that we're actually allocating to the class for sculpting. And what I imagine happening is that we'll most likely cover the content for the week, and also, give you enough tutorials and things to go home and deal with this, something like presentation techniques. But then also we'll have some time in class where we can actually just, carry on sculpting and fixing little things and so on our characters. Okay, and then your final submission is just a character turnaround render. There are some marks allocated within the rubrics to embedded knowledge. We can assume that you know Blender at least a little bit, and if you don't, then it should be like it was a prerequisite for the class. So if you don't have the software proficiency in place, you are going to struggle, and I would suggest that you sort of get there as soon as possible. There's a lot of introductory training material. There's also I think there's a software training course in Blender this year again. Last year, I think it was optional and hardly anyone did it, but we're running it again, and you're welcome to join in that class. Just let me know if you feel like you need to do some revision. I'm just going to quit Discord for now. Okay. Where was I? I was on the actual brief. Okay. And then we expect a certain manner of professionalism. So you'll see that all the assignments have specific naming conventions and outputs, and just make sure that the right file format and the right naming and all of that processes are followed. Okay. Then the practical component amounts to 80%. So that's the majority of your mark. We have 20% allocated to exploratory sculpts early on, week 3 already. Polished bust is 30% of your mark, and then character renders, the final one, 50% of your mark. So it does sort of build up to your final output. If you carry on working consistently, then that shouldn't be a problem. Applied theory would be, I don't know if these tooltips are necessarily accurate. I think I might still need to go and look at those. But we look at anatomy, of course, so that's in there. We've got 2 sessions on that. We've got at least 2 sessions on stylistic appeal and characteristics. And obviously blocking also has a certain amount of appeal to it. And then cinematic considerations would come in when we're doing lighting and camera settings and so on. Okay, and then the practical is evaluated based on your conceptual ability for a large portion, your observational attention to detail, basically, and the overall aesthetic quality of it. So it needs to be well made and be appealing at the end. Okay. Some other resources, obviously you'll need Blender. There's the Blender manual for more details on sculpting. Then there's the sculptor's website. CG Cookie also does a lot of sculpting content, and then something like Pinterest, perhaps, or Miro to just collate some reference. Okay, so that's a channel. Just to collate some references. You might notice that there's no, I mean, even though we're doing blocking and we're sort of trying to be original, there's no need for you to do this absolutely from scratch. So you're allowed to use references, and if you have some sort of a character or historical figure or actual person that you'd like to turn into a virtual character, then you're most welcome. There are tools and things that are referenced that are in line with a more realistic approach to sculpting, like base meshes and that sort of stuff. And we kind of cover more of that in the major. But I think it's worth considering, even though I still feel like the module is better served creating stylized characters. So yeah, sometimes we mention stylized characters. What I don't want you to try and do is create hyper-real characters in Blender and just sort of get fixated on copying what already exists. And and I'll show you why, because I mean, there's methods now that we can actually use to capture real life elements and virtualize them. So there's not a lot of learning opportunities in simply copying something. And I think that's why stylization is kind of like an important aspect to it. It doesn't mean that you have to be able to design it entirely yourself. It's more about creating a 3D version of that. So if you do find other people's concept art and you want to make some fan art of that, that's okay, as long as you combine some elements and you kind of make it your own. Okay, there's only one core practical section then, which sort of explains the tasks as you go through them. So you'll source and create concepts of humanoid character designs, a minimum of 20 images. This is just for you, but make notes on those and highlight the specific reason why you're using that particular reference. Sometimes you might choose a reference and say, you know, it's the way that he treated cloth, or it's the shape of the eyes, or it's the way that it's the style in which the sculpt was done, and the way that he treats creases or other details in there. So it's important that you not only get references, but also kind of make notes on those. And this is potentially an exercise that we can still get to today. But yeah, let's chat some more and see how much time we have until the end. Okay. So using references, creating simple humanoid shape is something that you need to do then. Then we do exploratory sculpts. So we're going to kind of distort that shape a little bit and see what happens if we, say, increase the size of the hips or the head or the shoulders or hands or whatever. Just kind of playing with proportions and seeing how we can make the character unique. Then we model hair and detail specific to our character. Okay, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And so we do cover a little bit of cloth and simulation and things like that as well, but more as a comparison to like what can be generated, what can be simulated, and how can we approach it if we just did it the old school way or the classic way and sculpted it. Okay, then finally you render 2 8-second turnaround videos, one of the full character, another close-up or detailed render of the character's facial features. And there you have your details of the deliverables again. These will obviously be replicated on Canvas as assignments for you to actually submit your work. So this is just a summary of that. Okay, so your digital submissions for the first exploratory sculpts will just be the blend file, and your polished bust would be a video, which you could use for this later assignment as well. So there's actually 2 8-second turnarounds. Like I said, this is the first one, and then the second one. You might want to improve on that for the final one if you combine them all. It's a good 3 weeks in between. So once you've gotten feedback on this, you might want to refine that and do another render. As long as this final render is a full view turnaround of your character, and then the more sculptural textural detail that you've put into the face. Okay, let's jump back here. So that is obviously just extracted from the brief. These are a little bit more elaborate than the weekly breakdowns. Again, with your submissions highlighted in there. And then there's some admin and logistical stuff like, okay, you have to check your submissions every time, of course. And then there's academic rules pertaining to attendance and late submissions, penalties, all that sort of stuff. And then the images that I sourced were mainly from Blender Studio Training. So that's the stylized character workflow. And you'll see more of that linked in the weekly breakdown. And then the other stuff was from Flip Normals. That's mainly what you saw on the homepage. These images, that's where they're sourced from. So these are obviously from Blender. These were actually done in ZBrush. Okay, now you might have heard of ZBrush, and it is a tool that's available to you to some extent if you're interested in getting it and exploring that. It allows you a higher level of detail because it's just geared for handling higher topology. But it's quite foreign when it comes to sort of the logical layout of software. It doesn't follow any of the software rules that you're used to. So it doesn't look like an Adobe product, and it doesn't look like Blender. So it might be quite a steep learning curve if you do want to go that route. But it might be appealing for some of you that have some history in that. And I don't really mind as long as you can translate the information that's covered in Blender to ZBrush. Okay, so those 3 images over there are from a ZBrush course done by Flip Normals. And it's quite good, but it focuses on realistic characters, which is kind of not really something that we're going for. But you can see there from the amount of detail, you could add that to a stylized character as well. I mean, this guy's not particularly realistic. Okay, let's see if I've covered everything. Term overview, home, got all that. Let's jump in here. Huh. What? Okay. let me fix that. Sorry, okay. And that's properly published. Okay, so this is what we're doing today. Does anyone have any questions regarding the brief at this point? Cool. Okay, awesome. Okay, so we've done course overview and the rough schedule. I think just to reiterate, let's go. First, exploratory sculpts due in week 3, not 2. I'll fix that. Polished bust week 5, and final character renders week 8. So you have quite a bit of time to work on the sculpt without having to wonder or worry too much about whether or not the topology is perfect. That is a concern for the majors. Okay, so the structure and the purpose of the assignment. I think you would have gathered by now, we look at all the aspects pertaining to character design, so proportions and anatomy, facial structure, all of that. And what this exercise is mainly used for in industry is for concept artists to present characters to a director or a potential manufacturer if it's a toy. So it's a 3D mock-up of a 2D design meant for referencing purposes mainly. It's not going to work directly in your 3D scenes. It's going to bog it down. It's most likely going to be quite heavy. It's going to cause your renders to crash and things like that because it's not meant to be integrated into the entire pipeline. It's literally a standalone output that you could, yeah, like I said, 3D print or hand over to a series of steps. So the ones, it's the outcome of one of these steps. Okay, so options in 3D authoring tools and techniques. Let me just quickly have a squeeze here. What did I add? Okay, so just jumping to the bottom over here, we obviously have Blender at our disposal. Make sure that you've updated to Blender 3 at least by now. I don't know, some tutorial content might be for version 2.8 or whatever, and there shouldn't be that many differences in like the layout of the software or the tools. Blender 3.4 is just more optimized. And well, there's less bugs and there's some other features and tools that'll be better and work better. So yeah, just make sure that you've updated. And then there's also a ton of learning resources on Blender Studio, which I've added here, but I'll get to that later. The other option that I just wanted to show quick in terms of 3D authoring tools, if you do a quick, I don't know, Google search, right, for 3D authoring tools, you'll get a list of, okay, so the best ones for modeling. So this is nonsense because how is Unity a modeling tool? But anything really that creates 3D content can be considered a 3D authoring tool. Okay, so we've got Cinema 4D, we've got Modo here, Maya. I don't know how Unity is a 3D authoring tool. It's a game engine. Can hardly model anything in Unity, but okay, there it is. And then there's a couple of smaller ones that, or techniques rather, that we can use. And I've highlighted them here. Okay, so Maxon 1 is the one that links to ZBrush. As an educational institution, if you go to Maxon 1, let's see, there's a link to educational licenses somewhere. I think you have to go buy, and then students and teachers. And then Maxon One is a $10 purchase every 6 months. Okay, so but with Maxon One, you get Cinema 4D, Forger, which is a mobile sculpting app. If anyone has an iPad interested in just sculpting straight on there, Red Giant and Redshift Universe and those sort of things won't really apply to you because they're sort of After Effects add-ons. Cinema 4D renderer, don't actually know what Universe is. And then there's ZBrush, which is the other one, part of the bundle. So it's an option for you. The other thing that's become really commonplace in 3D and 3D authoring, specifically in VFX, but I've linked a couple of game-related content here, even though, I mean, they're exported and rendered in the game engine, but they're not strictly game content. They're actually cinematic content. So I don't know if anyone of you would be familiar with Adam. Adam was a series that Oats Studios produced with the help of Unity. And it was about these sort of robots that kind of wake up and they have like human characteristics, and it's sort of this post-apocalyptic world, and it's nicely done. So Oats Studios is Neil Blomkamp's kind of VFX studio. Neil Blomkamp is the guy that made like District 9, and well, early on he made did he do Elysium, I think, or Chappie, or whatever. This is IMDb. Sorry, that's not where I wanted to go. But Oats Studios also does a bunch of other stuff now. If you go to check out their work, you'll probably pick up like a lot of the elements, VFX elements are like quite high quality assets, and it's realistic because it is technically real. They scan a lot of their content. They scan and record facial animation. So a lot of the 3D content is actually generated and not manually created. There's another link here to Book of the Dead, which is another Unity project where they showed off Unity's rendering capabilities. And the majority of these assets are also either photogrammetry. So that's where you basically scan real world objects using multiple photographs of the same element. Then you get software like, there's a bunch. Trinio, let me just see. I've got a couple on my phone here. The sort of the commercialization of tech like LiDARs that are now in iPad Pros and iPhone Pros, and depth sensing cameras, so dual cameras that can sort of compare angles and triangulate and sort of figure out the depth of objects. They're all fairly new to the market, but they help promote certain processes and techniques like AR, like presentation of technology, but also capturing actual things in the physical world. And you could do this with the DSLR as well, but the tools and the technology that used to be kind of like exclusive to military use or industrial use is now sort of in the common commercial space, and you can access these tools and actually generate objects like this. Okay, so it's not great these aren't great examples of characters, and again, it's not necessarily. stuff under architectural or where is it? Cultural heritage and history. Now people often go and scan environments. I don't know how that's, well, that's just in this destroyed factory, but if you view it and you look at the actual topology in here, you'll see that it's quite scrambled. That's the kind of feedback in topology that you get. I think I did a scan of my face at some point that I can show you. I just need to dig for it a little bit. Okay, so there's Trinio. There's for some that are more Android inclined, I think Polycam is one of them that can do both. Okay. So these are some scans of objects and things like that. And it might be an interesting point of departure, especially if you want to base a character off, like if you want to do a self-portrait or a person or whatever, a different person, I don't know, your friend or your lover or whatever, you could scan their face and you could use them and model them, depending on how they feel about it. Polycam, and then there's photo catch and reality capture. I suppose reality capture is another interesting one. It was purchased by Epic Games, and they recently released their mobile, what do you call it? Sort of companion. A lot of these services, though, they don't allow you to like infinitely just scan things because it takes quite a lot of compute power to translate the sequence of images or video, whatever you've captured, into a 3D object. So a lot of these services charge you for compute power. If you upload your second or third or fourth scan, then they're going to start charging you for those scans and to download them and to export them. If you want to do it yourself, I think there's a couple of these as well, but Meshroom is an interesting, I think sort of open source. Is it open source? It's free. I don't know if it's open source. It looks like it's open source because it's allowing you to contribute to it on GitHub. And then you get certain plugins for it as well. Yeah, with Meshroom, you basically hand over your library of images, and then it constructs it using your own GPU. So it's going to kind of feel like your computer's rendering to figure out what this object looks like. And yeah, and then you're let's see, this one was scanned, so I'm just going to go. I actually want to go to SyncSketch and just quickly have a look at that again. And once again, you can see that sometimes when you scan something in a lot of detail, that you get quite a bit of, or if you had a lot of photographs from that particular angle, you'll see that sometimes the topology kind of makes it up as it goes along. But if it has point cloud information, it'll construct it. And this is still kind of functional topology from a sculpting point of view. Okay, so let me continue on this 3D authoring tools and techniques kind of tangent for a little bit longer. I just want to show you some actual scans, and then we can start with some basic sculpting stuff, and then let's do exercises that we'll do later. But first, let's take a short break. Take a little pause. Okay. Can you all still see that?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Okay, so these are some of the software applications that I spoke about. Polycam, Reality Scan, Photo Scan, all of those. Polycam. feels the easiest to work with if you're on an iPad, because that creates a little bit of weirdness. But then there's a LiDAR option, and let me rather show you. So here's a scan that I've done of like just to kind of see what the level of detail is. My daughter's Lego, and you can see, it's not perfect. There's some parts that you can miss, but it's fairly decent when it comes to like a reference or the reference for volume or something like that. Let's quickly jump into some of the others here. Trinio I've used quite a lot. This is a paid app though, and also with various levels of success. Actually, what makes Trinio better for me is the way that it can use AR technology. So it's got that AR tab at the top, and if I press record, you can see at the top right, it's starting to build and it's putting all these dots around. It's starting to build all this sort of 3D information that I'm feeding it. Yeah, and obviously the more you can move around and look at different angles, you can see that at the top it's actually generating. And then once that bar at the bottom is complete, then you have your scan, and then you have the virtual object, which you can then export. So I'm just going to show you another way. This is Scandi. Here I've done some sort of experiments for scanning my own face with different levels of success. Yeah, sometimes you move around, your nose gets a little smaller, your eyes get weird or whatever. So it's not perfect, but again, for volume, it's pretty good. Or for reference, it's pretty good. And this has even a stranger kind of scan interface, because it literally just uses your depth sensing camera. So it immediately generates the topology around that. And then as you start recording, you have to kind of like, yeah, well, that's tricky. It did one single scan of my face. Interesting. Cool, but fun stuff to play with, whether you're going to be using it for this exercise or not. I still think it's worthwhile exploring. So yeah, this one I think I scanned. I can show you again what they look like if you export them. So if I send this to myself as it's a compressed file, choose 3D editor. Sweet, why not? Blender. I'd like a GLB actually, and scale in centimeters. Anywho, let's see what that does. Exporting. Dropping it, sending it to myself. Okay, then the GLB would be in my downloads, so I can go file, import GLTF or GLB. This is a common web format, so a lot of Sketchfab's files are GLB as their native, well, not their native Sketchfab format. Otherwise, they'll move to or they'll allow you to download the original format, which was either FBX or wherever it came from, even blend files sometimes. But then, yeah, the GLB is web optimized. It carries textures and topology data, so it's perfectly fine for that. Let me just import this and also just stop mirroring my phone screen, which I think I did already. And there you can now see, okay, well, it's on its back, and it doesn't have textures at the moment. Well, it should have the embedded textures in there. A little strange to look at yourself like that. And if we look at the wireframe, you can see it's pretty gross. But you could technically still go and sculpt on this. So, you know, taking like your grab tools, moving them around. Sorry, not the render mode. So I can go and change things up a little bit. You know, those sort of faces that you pull. Yes. Okay. So this was then repurposed and used and compared to what I was doing in MetaHuman at some point. I don't know if any of you saw this exhibition running at Open Windows some time ago, or know of MetaHumans. So Unreal Engine released this MetaHuman creator some time ago. that allows you to go and tweak facial features and match that of actual people, or just generate humans from scratch, combining different models together. The sessions are quite taxing on your system because they're basically running remotely through Unreal servers. So there's no installation or anything like that. You just have to go to metahumanunrealengine.com, and then you can go and create one. It creates a session for you. Sometimes it takes a little while. Okay, you can see it's quite high detailed. Let's see, what else can I show you in here? Yeah, I would have shown the some of the game students last year when I was busy with it. It's sort of more game tech, but it also speaks to the whole idea of doing realistic humans, because if you have a tool like this that's kind of geared towards making realistic humans, then why would you want to sculpt a realistic human? And that's why I think the strength in this exercise lies in the stylization and what you can add to the mix, rather than just taking something pre-existing. Gareth, sorry.
Stefan, I just wanted to ask, can you update Blender without using Steam, or is using Steam okay for updating it, or can we use another third party, or should we just go straight to Blender and update
I just downloaded it straight from Blender's website. Okay. I know Steam could be convenient for you to update it from there, but I don't think you always have the latest necessarily. I don't know what the downfalls are of doing it through Steam. I know some apps like Krita is actually a paid app on Steam, where you can just download it straight from krita.com, and then it's krita.org or something. Okay, so this is kind of like the interface that you're greeted with, the different characters that you can make, and then this was kind of like where I went with that self-portrait, and then I can just quickly show you how that works. So if you want to say edit this, then you can go and blend it into different people. So you can go and select a portion on the face, like, I don't know, the eyes, and then you can go and say, well, I want to blend it a little bit more to that person's eyes, or that person, or that. And I messed up now. I messed up my face. And undo. Okay. What else? There are some sculpting tools, as they'd like to call it, but they're also just kind of like dragging parameters within a limit. So they don't just allow you to do anything. It's very human based. So they kind of limit it to certain proportions. Then you can also move things around. You can obviously also navigate around the character itself. But the most fascinating thing to me was actually not just the shape, but how texture plays such an important role. So if you go to something like the head and you just go into, it's the skin. And then just tweaking things like the skin texture changes the character into a completely different character. It's like their history and all their hang-ups and their personality and everything is just embedded in their skin texture. So this guy had a really rough life, probably like a trucker or a farmer or something. And then this guy, he's got an office job. This guy's gotten punched in the face. So it's like really, it's very interesting to see what textual detail does. So it'll definitely have an impact on your final output as well. So eventually I think I settled for something that kind of looked like my worried face, which I can't seem to pinpoint right now. Lol. Okay, that's a bit old. Okay, and I'm just going to leave it there. I'm actually just going to leave. And then I ended up rendering something like this out of the glasses, and recorded the facial capture using another AR tool that does eye tracking and facial movement tracking and stuff like that. So it's a fun process. Okay, the more hands-on. So okay, now we've come from 3D authoring tools, from making everything by hand in something like Maya or Blender or ZBrush, to generating content using photogrammetry tools. And I think photogrammetry tools are certainly useful, and they're excellent for references, but they won't satisfy the end product for this module. So we'll have to get our hands dirty and sculpt at some point. Right, so here's another example of what the workflow would typically look like. And normally, you can, I normally start, especially if I have a character design in place, with sort of box modeling out a primary shape and then sculpting on that. So I'll create something like this, most likely add a mirror modifier, and then, you know, kind of that would be my box shape that I start with. But you could obviously also start with a whole other range of tools. You can import curves from something like a vector program, and as SVGs, and you can change grease pencil lines into physical objects. I also quite enjoy working with metaballs or meta shapes, because they allow you to quickly and easily kind of create shapes, or very organic looking shapes that you can then go and turn into geometry and sculpt onto. Also, just even your base cube that I normally delete. Let's get rid of these metaphors as well. Even that is a perfectly fine place to sculpt with, or start sculpting with, if you use Dyntopo tools. So the main difference between your normal sculpting tool, okay, so this one is now just set to this type of tool, but you can also see more of that being exhibited here. So that's a little bit more of a insight into what the tool settings are, and whether Dyntopo is enabled, whether there's any symmetry to your mesh. So normally I would suggest, at least in the beginning, start off by X mirroring your symmetry. You can also switch it on up here. Yep, and then broad stroke changes would be the grab tool, where you can literally just, I think that's my front now, so you can literally just grab things like that. But the moment that you switch on Dyntopo, yeah, that's fine. It'll give you a warning, but now instead of just grabbing and moving it, it's going to actually, let's just see, it might not do it for the grab tool, but as soon as you start adding topology, you'll see that it's adding, well, as soon as you start sculpting on that, it's actually adding topology. Even the smooth tool, to a degree, adds topology. So very quickly with Dyntopo, you can shape things, and you can get to shapes real quick using this tool. Not the grab tool so much, but especially the sculpting tools like Inflate, adds more geometry and more topology. And this is kind of what we're doing when we're exploring sculpts. So we're just kind of like looking for shapes. And I wouldn't actually, like, this is a starting point. This is a way of, like, you know, figuring out what a character would look like, or maybe just coming up with some interesting shapes. But the most useful tool that I've seen concept artists use is unrelated visual input. And especially if it's like a doodle or something, then your brain kind of makes sense of what you're seeing, what you're looking at, and you can come up with really creative solutions that way. So let's say if we weren't to, like, already have a design in mind or in place, but we are just trying to kind of like come up with anything, then I would do something like, let's just grab a book here, and I've got a pen, sorry, just on the other side. So if I just, not even, like, hardly looking at the paper and just making shapes. My kids have drawn a couple of images in this drawing book, so I'm just gonna put to a page. And like, not even look at what I'm drawing, but just kind of like try and make some scribbles to look like, or whatever, just kind of like I don't know if these are most likely for like shapes of characters, not faces per se, because that would require some sort of, it has details, it has markers. But for a character outline or for a silhouette, it could be quite simple, doing like just odd shapes. And then afterwards, kind of like figuring out, what is that? Is that a leg? Is that a body? And I'm even talking about like little things. The smaller you draw, these nothing comes to mind yet, but like they took 3 seconds to make, so I can make a million more. And then the ones that stand out and kind of speak to you and look like characters, you could probably go and develop that a little bit more, place some eyes, place some limbs, and see what you can come up with. Another method is obviously, researching other people's character designs. But I feel like that's something that you should rather do later in the stage of coming up with concepts, because it kind of, it already fixes you to a certain like approach and mindset and style and everything if you get caught up in that too much. The idea is, though, that you do go and collect some references. I would say think of a character with a particular mood in mind. So if we jump back to the brief, then you can see that the main character is a little bit more aggressive, perhaps, whereas these are a lot more playful. And this is almost kind of like classic beauty. So decide on what kind of mood you want to carry over, and then that is maybe a point of departure, because then you can go and say, okay, well, let's look at Gothic designs, or let's look at playful designs, or let's look at classic designs, or something like that. And then you can start collating and gathering some content. I'm going to run you through a few more of these steps. And then what I'd like you to do is spend some time doodling, creating 2D references that we can continue with in class next week. We can discuss them, we can look at them. I did create a folder on Drive where you can submit these elements as sort of points of discussion. I don't feel, and I think that would be even more valuable if we can all discuss them together. We can all look at them and go like, that looks cool, that's interesting, or that, So putting all your images together, whether you use Miro or whether you use Photoshop or whatever, these are your references with notes on them, with little drawings. You can even cut them out of a magazine, stick them on a piece of paper and make notes next to them, and then just take a picture and upload that to the Drive. One thing that I often forget to add is, and I have done that to the brief, but not here, is that whenever you upload or whenever you do something, please use naming conventions. So for the working files, same rings true here. Just your student number, underscore, whatever the product is. So in this case, it would just be references, and it would most likely be a JPEG or a PDF. Okay, so whatever you export to that folder. Okay, this isn't strictly homework, but it is to, it's going to make your process easier if you have some sort of visual reference, some sort of point of departure. And then your other homework is to go and look at Blender Studio's training stylized character workflow, the introduction and update to the introduction, the portion on head sculpting, defining goals and sculpting time-lapse. Those are the only free ones that you can watch, but I'd like you to watch them before we continue with next week's class. This is part of that whole flipped model. So all you need to do is grab some images, upload them to this folder, and watch these training tutorials. Okay, there's more information here that we did sort of look at briefly, but you're welcome to go and look at it in more depth. And then there's just other useful links. But your main concern is your tasks and deadlines over here. So go and have a look at those. It'll give you a good overview of what happens with the stylized character compared to a realistic character workflow. And like I said before, there might be aspects of your stylized character that have sort of an element of realism to it, like skin texture or folds or creases, or the way that muscles and fat anatomy and things sits on your character. All of those things which stem from realism but we'll find a way of interpreting it and exaggerating it and making it a little bit more appealing. So yeah, that's still useful. Cool. Back to Blender. Okay, so once I've arrived at some form of design, it's easier to go ahead and I don't have to just kind of like make things up as I go along, because this is still kind of like far off and not really going anywhere. I'm not feeling particularly excited about this yet. Obviously, any of these sculpting tools, if you hold down your control key, they do the opposite. If you hold down shift key, they'll smooth. And then yeah, there's these are all the sort of construction brushes, so they're very kind of clay based. They draw, and there is something that you can do. So Dyntopo just adds topology. We'll re-topologize that in the end. But also, as you can see in my workflow, when I went from, let's say, this model to the next, it looked more like, so this was a subdivision that I did on it, and then started sculpting detail in there. I think what happened at some point, I was just demoing like how to sculpt detail in there, and then it ended up doing it. And I didn't undo that before I saved it. So if I do go back into sculpting mode, I can actually reduce that topology again by just being a little bit further from the surface. It should. Let me just try that. What is you complaining about? Why not Dyntopo? Modifiers. Oh, the mirror modifier. Okay, fine. That's fine. So yeah, the brushes, because of the resolution that they're set to, I think it might be within Dyntopo. So there's a detail size, which means that the closer you get to it, the more detail you'll gain. See, so now it's high detail, and if I move back and I do the same brush stroke, then it's kind of collapsed all that detail into. So that's what that subdivide collapse is doing, and that's also the detail that you set over here. I like to keep it standard at the beginning at least. I suppose you can switch to smooth shading if you want it to appear smoother, but that's kind of like a standard and allows you to do quite a bit with it. So then we'll start sculpting in detail in here. Check that. Sort of dial back and come back the whole time to make sure that everything is kind of functional. There will be stages where we remesh when you find that your Dyntopo maybe gets too heavy, or it's not really, there isn't room for it to improve from the stage that it's at, and you need a different topology structure to go on with it. Especially the major students, when we cover the major content, you'll notice that there's a clear parallel, but at some point, the major students are going to retopologize that mesh and bring in a proper mesh so that they can continue using something like multi-res to add detail rather than Dyntopo. So the outcome will still be a turnaround render of your character, but the major students will have better functioning topology. Okay. So the next step from this was the, let me just switch that on and off. That as well. Okay, so this was the smooth model, and then the sculpt started like this. You can see that it's still quite, and I tend to duplicate, because a lot of topology gets kind of like, it's a very organic workflow. So often what happens is if you sculpt on something too long, you can kind of wreck it. So I tend to take that geometry, and as soon as I decide, okay, well, now's a good stage to go for more detail, then I'll duplicate that mesh, hide the previous one, and continue on the next one. So I always have sort of a fallback or something that I can shrink wrap to. It's just a good way of saving your work. Okay, so that's what the sculpted model then looked like. Sort of broad stroke outlines, nose in the right place kind of thing, some hair topology in there. The next version was the final sculpt. So this is kind of something like what you would be presenting. You can see that most of the details now captured. The topology is a complete mess because yeah, that's what it looks like, but that's fine. And I think the only other thing that we'll do in the module is we'll find interesting ways of accessorizing and posing this character so that it looks better. And obviously we'll light it and do a proper turnaround render. So we'll present this in a lot more complete way. And then for the majors, we'll continue to go and I think for this one, there's a retopologized model down here. Ooh, there's another one. Okay, he ended up getting a little bit smaller, but you can see that the topology is a lot better. Looking for a wireframe. Okay, so the topology has gotten a lot better. We'll go through all these tools to make sure that it aligns with the geometry that you've created. This model specifically was created for 3D printing purposes, so you'll see that none of the cavities are actually open geometry. Everything is closed, everything is solid and manifold, so it can print. But yeah, and then eventually it was rigged and posed, and we'll do more of that in the major. Cool. I'm going to leave it there for now, since we've got another session after this. Any questions from anyone leading us? Yes.
I just have one question. Is it best to have a 3D scanner for this year or term?
A 3D scanner?
I know a friend who has a 3D scanner, so...
Oh. I don't have any friends with 3D scanners, so
Me.
I think I have one friend now. It's not essential. I think photogrammetry does the trick for references, and also if you want references 3D scanned, then you could probably do that too. I don't mind. I just think that eventually you're going to have to sculpt on it in any case. So however you get to that point, I think 3D scanning will basically get you to, or photogrammetry will get you to this sort of this point where you have a lot of topology and data and you have shape, but you need to now go and mold that and make it your own.
Cool, thank you.
I'm probably going to sound repetitive and all that, but I just want to make sure. So if you're majoring in 3D, the full 4 hours you stay for?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes?
No, that was my bad. I was trying to put it down.
Yeah, so you can make any humanoid character. That's the only restriction. But I mean, what's that film? Something of water. The sound of water. I don't know. There's this fish character in there. Avatar, also another example of humanoid, but not human. So you can, Avatar, Way of the Water. But there's this other dude with like gills and stuff. I forgot what the film is called now. But I think in the major class I even used Horton Hears a Who as an example because it's an elephant, but it has human characteristics. So it stands on its hind legs. It has facial features like a human. It happens to have a trunk in the middle of his face, but that's just an elongated nose. Anything goes. Yeah, you can do a person and change it up if you want to. Okay, cool. So let's take a bit of a break. Yeah, isn't that out today? Hogwarts Legacy.
So it was out on the 10th, but I pre-ordered the deluxe edition, so I got 72 hours early access, and all of my
72 hours.
Yeah, so all of my friends like want the game and stuff like that, but they didn't get it. So I've just been like streaming it, making them jealous, making them want to get it and all that. I've convinced like 5 of my friends that never wanted to play it to get it. So It's just a lot. It's a lot of fun. It's a very good game. I'd definitely recommend it. 10 out of 10.
Question from John. The class is still split into 2 sections. So there's still a 2-hour module and a 2-hour major, but the Google link is the same. The Canvas core shell is different, but I'll walk you through it. The deliverables are different. They just happen to be back to back. Okay, cool. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Stefan.
Bit of a break. Be there. See ya.